Hi, I'm Megan Ellis. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where front porches are for gossip and everyone knows whose car is parked where it shouldn't be. It's a place where family trees have deep roots, and my family, the Ellises, made sure I never forgot my place on our branch. Right at the bottom, perpetually behind in life. My older sister, Sarah, was the golden child. She did everything right and on time. She married her high school sweetheart, had two perfect kids by 28, and lived in a sprawling two-story colonial with a wraparound porch. My older brother Mark was the self-made man, the one who understood the market. He flipped houses and talked about equity and ROI like they were old friends. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world are you watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. And then there was me. At 31, I was single, childless, and renting a small one-bedroom apartment above a flower shop downtown. I ran my own graphic design business from a corner in my living room, a career my family found flimsy and intangible. To them, if you didn't punch a clock for a big company, you didn't have a real job. They loved comparing me to my siblings. My life was the cautionary tale they told their friends. They told me, often and to my face, that I would never own a home. But life has a strange and powerful way of turning cruel words into fuel. It was a sweltering Sunday in July, the kind where the air is thick with humidity and the smell of freshly cut grass. My parents were hosting their annual summer barbecue. The entire extended family was there, along with a few neighbors who were close enough to be considered family. The backyard was a sea of lawn chairs, and the smoke from my dad's grill hung heavy in the air. I was trying to make myself small, nursing a lukewarm iced tea and hoping to avoid the inevitable line of questioning about my life. But my father, a man who loved an audience, spotted me. "Megan!" he boomed, gesturing with his barbecue tongs. Our neighbors, the Prestons, turned to look. "Still enjoying that little apartment of yours?" I forced a smile. "It's fine, Dad. The rent is reasonable." He let out a hearty laugh, the kind that was more for performance than genuine humor. "Reasonable? You're just throwing money down the drain. You know, at your age, your sister was already on her second home." He turned to Mr. Preston. "This one," he said, pointing the tongs at me like I was an exhibit, "doesn't even know what a mortgage is. She'll be renting forever." The small group chuckled politely. I felt a familiar heat creep up my neck. My sister Sarah was sitting nearby, looking impeccable in a white sundress. She caught my eye, a smug little smirk playing on her lips. She raised her glass of Chardonnay in a mock toast. "Give her a break, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe she'll win the lottery." The laughter that followed was louder this time. It echoed across the lawn, sharp and pointed. My brother Mark clapped Dad on the back and said, "Good one, Pop." My mom just shook her head with a sigh that said, "What are we going to do with you?" I just stood there, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My iced tea suddenly felt heavy in my hand. I wanted to pour it over my father's head. I wanted to tell Sarah that her perfect life was boring. But I didn't. I just stood there and took it, the way I always did. The laughter of my family, the sound of my own failure, rang in my ears. Inside, though, something different was happening. A cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. A fire was lit, not of anger, but of determination. They thought they knew my story. They had no idea I was about to write a new chapter. That barbecue wasn't a one-time thing. It was just a snapshot of my entire life. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday dinner was a stage for my public humiliation. It was a relentless, quiet campaign to remind me of my shortcomings. Christmas was always the worst. Sarah and her husband would unwrap gifts for their home, a high-end espresso machine, a smart thermostat, a framed print for their foyer. Mark would get tools for his latest renovation project, or a gift certificate to a lumber yard. I would get a gift card to a chain restaurant or a new sweater. The unspoken message was clear. They were building lives, investing in their future. I was just existing. "We just want you to be stable, Megan," my mom would say, her voice laced with a gentle, pitying concern that was more painful than outright criticism. She'd corner me in the kitchen while she was washing dishes, her hands submerged in soapy water. "It's not good for a woman your age to be so unsettled. Your sister had her first house by the time she was 26. "I'm happy, Mom," I'd reply, my voice tight. But are you secure? She'd press. That little business of yours? It's nice. A nice hobby. But you need a real career with a 401k. You need something to fall back on. What she meant was, you are a failure. Your choices are wrong. You are embarrassing us. My brother Mark was more direct. He'd visit my apartment and walk through it like he was inspecting a property for demolition. He'd tap the walls, frown at the plumbing, and critique the layout. You know, the bones of this place aren't bad, he'd say, trying to sound helpful. Too bad you're just paying someone else's mortgage. All this money you're throwing away on rent? You could have built up some serious equity by now. He never asked about my business. He never asked if I was happy. He only saw my life through the lens of financial statements and property values. To him, my rented apartment wasn't a home, it was a liability. The constant dismissal chipped away at me for years. It made me doubt myself. I started to believe their narrative. Maybe I was irresponsible. Maybe my business was just a silly hobby. Maybe I was destined to be the family spinster, the cautionary tale they'd whisper about at weddings and funerals. The weight of their disappointment was a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to shake off. They didn't know my secret. They didn't know that while they were mocking me, I was working. While they were sleeping, I was hunched over my laptop, taking on extra design contracts from clients in different time zones. While they were buying new cars and going on vacation, I was eating ramen noodles and driving my 15-year-old Honda Civic, praying the transmission would hold out for one more year. My business wasn't a hobby, it was my lifeboat. I had started it 5 years ago with nothing but a used laptop and a flicker of talent. Now it was a thriving enterprise. I designed websites for small businesses, created branding packages for startups, and managed social media campaigns for companies across the country. I was good at it, and I was making more money than any of them could have imagined, but I never told them. I learned early on not to share my successes with them. I remember one afternoon, a few years ago, I was feeling optimistic. I had just landed a huge client. I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table, scrolling through real estate listings on my phone, just dreaming. "Look at this one, Mom," I said, showing her a picture of a cute little bungalow. "Isn't it charming?" She glanced at the screen and let out a soft, pitying laugh. "Oh, honey, that's a nice dream to have." She patted my hand. "Maybe someday, if you get a real job." The words hit me like a slap in the face. The excitement drained out of me, replaced by a familiar shame. That was the day I stopped telling them anything. My dreams, my plans, my savings account, they all went into a locked vault. I built a wall around my financial life. I let them see the struggling artist in the tiny apartment because that's who they wanted me to be. It was easier than fighting their perceptions. Behind that wall, I was a different person. I was a meticulous planner. I had spreadsheets tracking every dollar I earned and spent. I had a secret savings account that I fed with relentless consistency. I met with a financial advisor who helped me invest my money wisely. Every time my family made a condescending remark, it was like they were depositing another $100 into my "I'll show you" fund. I worked in silence, fueled by their disbelief. My dream wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a detailed, fully funded plan. The final push, the one that broke the dam of my patience, came on Thanksgiving. The whole family was gathered at my parents' house. The air was filled with the scent of roasted turkey and the sound of the football game droning on in the living room. We were all sitting around the dining table, stuffed and sleepy, picking at the last of the pumpkin pie. The conversation turned, as it often did, to real estate. Mark was bragging about a duplex he had just flipped. Sarah was talking about plans to remodel her master bathroom. Then, my dad turned his attention to his and my mom's future plans. "You know, your mother and I are thinking about downsizing in a few years," he announced. "This house is getting to be too much for us." My aunt chimed in. "Oh, but it's a beautiful home. Where would you go?" Dad leaned back in his chair with a theatrical sigh. "Probably a nice condo somewhere. Sell this place, travel a bit. The only problem is what to do with all our extra stuff." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes scanning the table until they landed on me. A slow, cruel grin spread across his face. "I've got it," he said, his voice booming. "Maybe Megan can move into the shed when we downsize." The table erupted, not with gasps of shock, but with roars of laughter. Mark slapped the table, howling. Sarah's husband choked on his coffee. Even my mom let out a tittering laugh, covering her mouth with her hand as if to hide her amusement. I just sat there. I felt the blood drain from my face. The shed. He had said it in front of everyone. He thought my future, my life, was worth nothing more than the small, dusty shed in their backyard where they kept the lawnmower and old paint cans. I managed to smile politely. I even let out a small, forced chuckle, as if I was in on the joke. But inside, something shattered. It was the last thread of hope I had that they would ever see me, the real me. In that moment, surrounded by the cacophony of their laughter, I felt utterly alone. That night, I drove home in a cold, quiet rage. The laughter echoed in my head. The shed, the shed, the shed. I walked into my apartment, the one they all pitied, and I didn't even turn on the lights. I walked straight to my laptop. For weeks, I had been watching a house. A beautiful, charming, craftsman-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood they had always said was out of my league. I had an offer ready to go, but I had been hesitating, scared to make such a huge leap. Not anymore. I pulled up the email from my realtor. I took a deep breath, and with the sound of my family's laughter still ringing in my ears, I pulled the trigger. I sent the email. Let's do it. Full asking price, no contingencies. The next morning, the world felt different. While my family was likely sipping coffee, complaining about their hangovers, and recovering from too much turkey, I was on a mission. The sun was barely up when I met my realtor at a small cafe. We went over the final paperwork and I transferred the down payment. It was a number so large it looked fake on the screen. By 10 a.m., I was at the title company, my hand shaking slightly as I signed paper after paper. My name, Megan Ellis, appeared over and over again. Deed, title, escrow. These were the words my father said I'd never understand. And here I was, mastering them. The final document was pushed in front of me. I signed it with a firm, steady hand. It was done. My name was on the deed of a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom craftsman-style home. The price tag was $74,000. It had a porch swing, a backyard with a massive oak tree, and a detached studio that would be perfect for my business. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, and it was mine. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the house. The for sale sign on the lawn now had a bold, sold banner slashed across it. I sat in my car for a long time, just looking at it. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. It was a statement. It was the physical manifestation of every late night, every skipped vacation, every condescending joke I had ever endured. I got out of the car and walked up the front path. The keys felt heavy and real in my hand. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was empty, filled with sunlight and the smell of fresh paint. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I walked from room to room, touching the walls. I leaned against a window frame in the living room and looked out at the quiet street. A single tear rolled down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of victory. In a small town, news travels faster than a wildfire. I hadn't told a soul in my family, but I didn't have to. Within 48 hours, my phone started ringing. It was my mother. Her voice was thin, laced with a bewildered panic. "Megan, Carol Preston just called me. She said you bought the old Henderson house on Maple Street. That has to be a mistake, right?" "No, Mom," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's not a mistake. I closed on it yesterday." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "But how?" she finally stammered. "That house was... It was very expensive, Megan." "I've been saving," I said simply. "Saving? From what? Your little computer business?" Her disbelief was so thick I could feel it through the phone. She sounded more angry than happy, more confused than proud. An hour later, a text from Sarah lit up my screen. It was just 2 words. "Whose money?" I stared at the text. Not congratulations, not "I'm so proud of you," just a cold, sharp accusation. She couldn't fathom that I could have done this on my own. In her world, I was the screw-up. Success was not part of my story. I texted back a single word: mine. Mark called that evening. His tone was a strange mix of forced nonchalance and condescension. Hey sis, heard you bought a little starter home. Good for you. Just be careful, okay? A mortgage can be a real killer if you don't know what you're doing. You can get in over your head pretty fast. Thanks for the advice, Mark, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I'll keep that in mind. Their reactions told me everything I needed to know. They weren't shocked that I had bought a house. They were shocked that I had shattered the narrative they had built for me. I had stepped out of the box they had put me in, and it terrified them. I spent the next few weeks moving in. I hired movers for the heavy furniture and spent days unpacking boxes, slowly turning the empty house into a home. I invited my few close friends, the ones who had supported my business from day one, and some of my new neighbors over for a small, casual housewarming party. I didn't invite my family. I knew they would find their way there eventually. They showed up an hour into the party, uninvited. My dad, my mom, Sarah, and Mark walked in together, a united front of skepticism. They wore fake, tight smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The party's cheerful buzz faltered for a moment as they entered. My friend Anna gave me a worried look, but I just gave her a reassuring nod. I walked over to greet them. "Surprise," my mom said, her voice overly bright. "We heard you were having a little get-together and wanted to see the place." "Welcome," I said, my tone neutral. My dad walked into the entryway, his eyes wide as he took in the high ceilings and the gleaming hardwood floors. He ran his hand along the polished wood of the staircase. This is nicer than ours," he muttered, almost to himself. Sarah's practiced smirk began to fade as she walked through the house. She paused in the doorway of the kitchen, her jaw slack. I had designed it myself. It had custom cabinets, quartz countertops, and a professional-grade stove. It was the kind of kitchen she pinned on Pinterest and bragged about wanting someday. She was silent. Mark, ever the expert, tried to find flaws. He tapped on walls, inspected the crown molding, and peered at the light fixtures. "Older home," he said loudly to anyone who would listen. "Probably has foundation issues. The electrical in these places can be a nightmare." But his words lacked their usual confidence. He couldn't find anything to criticize. They mingled awkwardly, their forced smiles looking more and more strained as they took in the reality of my home. It was bigger, newer, and more beautiful than they could have possibly imagined. This wasn't a little starter home. This was a statement. The climax came about an hour later. I was standing in the kitchen talking to Sarah. She was leaning against the island, swirling the wine in her glass, her eyes darting around the room. "Well, you certainly went all out," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "This mortgage must be astronomical. I hope you know what you're doing, Megan. It's a lot to take on by yourself." There it was, the final condescending assumption, that I was foolish, in over my head, and drowning in debt. I looked at her, at the sister who had smirked and mocked me my entire life. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a quiet, calm finality. "Excuse me for a second," I said softly. I walked to the small office I had set up just off the living room. On the desk was a leather-bound folder from the realtor and the title company. It contained copies of all the closing documents. I picked it up and walked back into the kitchen. My father and brother had joined Sarah at the island. All three of them looked at me, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I didn't say a word. I simply opened the folder and slid the final settlement statement across the quartz countertop toward my sister. She frowned, picking it up. Her eyes scanned the page, a flurry of numbers and legal terms. She saw the purchase price, $74,000. Her eyes widened. Then she scanned down the columns, looking for the loan amount, the mortgage details. She kept scanning, her brow furrowed in confusion. Finally, her eyes landed on the line item for loan amount. The number next to it was 0. The line for cash from borrower showed the full purchase price. She looked up at me, her face pale. "I don't understand," she whispered. I met her gaze. "There's no mortgage," I said, my voice quiet but clear. The words hung in the air. My father's jaw, which had been set in a tight line, went slack. He grabbed the paper from Sarah's hand, his eyes bugging out as he read it for himself. Mark leaned over his shoulder, his face turning ashen. He, the real estate expert, understood immediately. I hadn't just bought a house. I had paid for it. In cash, with the earnings from my little computer business. The smirks were gone. The condescension was gone. In their place was something I had never seen on their faces before: a stunned, bewildered silence. It wasn't just shock, it was fear. The fear of being wrong. The fear that the world they had constructed, with its neat little hierarchy and my designated spot at the bottom, had just been completely and irrevocably shattered. I had quietly and completely surpassed all of their boasting. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. The silence in the kitchen was louder than any words I could have spoken. I calmly turned away, walked to the coffee maker, and poured myself a cup of tea. My hands were perfectly steady. The party continued to buzz around us, but the four of us were in our own silent bubble. My friends and neighbors laughed and talked, oblivious to the family drama that had just unfolded. My triumph wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet. It was the simple act of pouring tea in my own kitchen, in my own home, while the people who had belittled me stood by, speechless. They didn't stay much longer. Sarah mumbled something about needing to get the kids home to the babysitter. She left first. My mom came over and gave me a stiff, awkward hug. "It's a lovely home, dear," she whispered, but she couldn't look me in the eye. My dad just stood by the door and muttered something about luck before walking out to his car. He didn't say goodbye. I stood on my new front porch and watched them leave. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt light. The heavy cloak of their expectations and disappointments had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had built this life for myself, brick by brick, in silence and in secret. And it was enough. So when they told me I'd never own a home, they were right about one thing. I didn't just own a home. I owned my freedom. I owned my success. I owned my story. If you've ever been mocked, laughed at, or told you'd never succeed, especially by the people who are supposed to lift you up, remember this: your success is not determined by their opinion. Let their doubt be your motivation. Work hard in silence. Let your success be the noise. Sometimes the quietest actions create the loudest revenge. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by your own family?